Cool. So, my number four. Sorry, did you say something, Tom?
No, no, I was just laughing at myself.
Okay, understandably so. Okay, so my number four is Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. This is 1976, I think. Sorry, 1967. And Zelazny is, without doubt, my favorite author in all of science fiction. Um, and yet my favorite book of his is only at number four. I'm not quite sure how that makes sense in my head, but I think of his overall catalog, like I enjoy every single book that I've read of his to an extremely high degree. But yeah, Lord of Light, Zelazny has got like a very very definite shtick that he does. He's all about fusing religion with really far future science fiction. And Lord of Light basically loosely adapts the Hindu pantheon to an interstellar civilization like millions of years in the future, basically. And what I love about Lord of Light is the central conceit of it is that this advanced civilization becomes stranded on a foreign planet, and over like generations after generations, the survivors from the wreck basically like congeal themselves into positions of power and eventually just become gods. So they take all the advanced technology that they had from the crash, keep it to themselves, and use it to rule over the new human population who come obviously through the generations. So yeah, it's I love the idea of that. I love the way that it plays out, and the idea of like you technology as a form of godhood plays into the famous Arthur C. Clarke quote about how any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And we spoke about in the last episode like battle scenes and how difficult battle scenes are to do. Um, this and how uninterestingly they can be overall. This book contains the best battle scene I've ever read in any book in any genre, bar none. Like the book just abruptly, three-quarters of the way through, pivots into this like apocalyptic confrontation where all the major players kind of meet on a battlefield, and you've got normal humans, you've got like these reanimated corpses that are controlled by these demonic drummers, you've got these like wind, almost like spirits that have their own that are the original inhabitants of the planet, and then you've got these again loosely adapted Hindu pantheon. So like Vishnu is there and Krishna, and there's and they wield like weapons of apocalyptic power, and yeah, just super well written. And it's one of those books. I think I've read it three times, and I still don't understand it. Probably only 50% understand it. It's very nebulous and very like impenetrable. But yeah, the scale of it is amazing, really thought provoking, and yeah, again, one of the most vivid reading experiences of my life. So yeah, Zelazny, favorite author. This, in my opinion, is his masterpiece.
So if this is your favorite book by your favorite author, why is it number four?
It's my no, it's my favorite author, my favorite book of his.
Okay, yes.
So I was
I see.
trying to explain that. Like he's my favorite author because all of his
The
work,
back catalogue, yeah, gotcha.
all of his work is outstanding that I've read, and I've read pretty much everything he's written at this point. Whereas, so for example, my number three, I think actually has written quite a lot of bad. Has is quite up and down.
Yeah. So like Muse, my favorite band, OK Computer by Radiohead, better than all their albums.
Exactly.
In some people's opinion.
How would you find that religion in any sort of not just books but films can be quite a challenging thing to kind of enjoy, I guess? What is it about the way he writes about? Because obviously you said there's lots of his books are quite not similar, but it's in the same sort of vein. How
Yes.
how does that land differently to maybe books where you, religion's picked up that maybe isn't quite as interesting? So I'm just thinking it can be quite a challenge, and the difference between religion and like far future big sci-fi ideas is quite. Do you know what I mean? Quite. I don't know. Just I'm just trying to work out how that lands in a fairly straightforward way.
So for me, I think there's two ways you can write religion. Either number one, you can be preachy and write from a position of the religious, which for me as an atheist, I would find really grating. Number two is the position of the like I'm an atheist, but I don't think I'm well, I wouldn't call myself like a smug atheist. Like I can still appreciate the beauty of ideas in religion. I can still appreciate the Bible as being an early attempt at philosophy, right? I can still see uh, merit and value in it, even if my problem with religion is more with the institution rather than the text. So what Zelazny does is take the text and, in this case, like the Hindu pantheon, and apply it to a far future. And almost, it's a reimagining of the Hindu myth. So that for me is like a perfect. It never gets to the level of preachy because these guys that have ascended to godhood and that call themselves Krishna and Brahma and whoever it is, they are terrible, terrible individuals, which I think that's one of the things that most people would agree. If power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you ever ascended to the level of being a god, you would be a dickhead. I just think the human brain is hardwired to want to preserve itself after all. And if you get to that level of ultimate control and ultimate power, you'll exploit everyone underneath you. So yeah, but he does he does all the religions throughout his back catalogue, and like he does one about Native American religion, which I don't understand enough about the Native American religion to I didn't have much of a predetermined opinion of it, but it's absolutely fascinating, and it's about this bounty hunter who enlists the help of uh, this alien that he hunted and kept trapped in a zoo for like hundreds of years to go and take on a greater threat. And yeah, Native American religion is all about life, death, rebirth, and secular nature of stuff. I find that stuff really fascinating when it's not delivered in a preachy, in a very overtly religious way. And Zelazny
Yeah.
doesn't do that.
Sounds like he was just studying, like a keen student of religion, and
I think he probably
brought
just
that in.
smoked way too much weed and just that was all he did. Just like read the Bible and think. Imagine if this guy had a laser.
Probably it
Good way of doing it.
probably allows him though with his book to kind of have a big idea and approach it from a different angle every time, which is
Yeah,
quite interesting, isn't it? So you kind of it's quite not an easy way, but it's an interesting way to approach because that's what you can get with some authors, like especially like fantasy authors, like their books can be quite similar because their concepts are different, but the way they approach it's the same. Whereas it sounds like you can approach it differently by going down that route.
yeah. I think, in fact, actually, I was like very divided on whether it was Lord of Light or Creatures of Light and Darkness, which is based on ancient Egyptian mythology. So, Alex, as a Stargate fan, I think that would be one for you because
Yeah,
Do you
definitely.
like Stargate?
that
It's the greatest program of all time.
Uh,
that's basic. Like the only downside is Creature of Light and Darkness doesn't have a teal'c, but apart from that, it's absolutely flawless in every way.
Oh, I'm out then. I'm out.
In
it's
that
funny
book,
actually. I was sorry. I was listening to the Ricky Gervais show podcast today, and they from like 2005, and they got an email from the guy that played Tilt. And they were saying it on the show
Good judge.
today.
What a
Yeah,
guy.
how is that? Sorry, Leo, I didn't mean to, it's just in my head.
it's all
Sorry.
good.
What did
I
it
don't know if
say?
Just how much they like the show. They're like, oh, we've had the guy from Stargate, Till, go to a judge, and I was like, didn't think anything of it.
Amazing.
And what a time! It's the first time I heard you mention it in years. So there we go.
Maybe one
How
day
weird.
Christopher Judge will write into our show. Is this a show? Just quickly before we go on, building on from your point, Liam, absolute power may corrupt absolutely, but only a Sith deals in absolutes. So how do you reconcile that?
It's true.
Anyway, that was worth it. Tom, on to your number 4.
My number four. My number four is the only one I haven't got a copy of. I've got a copy of the first one, so I'm gonna not get that, but it's
I
not
think
the
I
one
know
I've
what
got.
this
Is it?
is.
So it's the Greenbone Saga by Jade, no, by Fonda Lee, but my favorite was Jade Legacy, which is the third book in the series. Um,
It's currently on my shelf.
yes, currently on shelf. So, um, to me, again, it's probably to talk about the series. So I think realize as we've kind of gone through these and we've talked through kind of what we like, I think it shows me more and more that my interests lie in the character more than anything else, the character evolution. And I think there's one book that really brings that to life, one series. It's this one. So have you either read any of these books? Has anyone
Yeah,
touched
I
on
read
it?
the whole series.
Oh, you read the whole series? Okay, cool. I can tell by you're probably not in the same place as me with it.
No,
Um,
no, but no, I liked it. I wouldn't get
yeah,
anywhere near my top 10, but I did like it.
think for me, I love anything where you can follow people's stories from kind of youth all the way to kind of adulthood. And I think with this, we follow a whole family, a whole region, a whole area.
Particularly
And
family.
yeah, basically family. It's got a big Godfather sort of vibe to it. Um, Set in a world where it's very low fantasy. So the fantasy comes in element where Jade is kind of like you have Jade, you'll be able to use Jade to enhance your powers, and you'll be able to do certain things. To be honest with you, I found myself reading it, and I think without the fantasy, I don't think it'd have been much different for me. I think I just really enjoyed sort of the characters. So, um, the family kind of goes from at the start it's quite calm, quite placid, and they kind of run the let's call it for the sake of this conversation, sort of like a criminal underworld, which helps them sort of run the city in the area. Um, but we follow characters from the youth. I think I've got Hilo and Shay and
Sure.
reason Shay. And I'm not going to kind of go into it too much detail because again, I don't think the reason I love this book so much is less about the overall story, more about the character development. But I think what I'd just touch on is that Jade City and the second book very much set over like a few month, 6 month period, and you really kind of get it's about 500-600 pages. And then Jade Legacy, she does something really brave, which I've never actually seen any book do in a series. Is Jade Legacy covers about 25 years, I think it's something like that. And these characters that you followed from um you almost follow them from so like the Godfather you kind of start you got Al Pacino kind of that's what he is and then by the end of it he becomes Godfather. So those two books you've kind of covered Hilo becoming like the head of the family and Shay becoming like the right hand man. There's all different terminologies for it. And then we then get to
Weatherman.
see the weatherman. That's it, the weatherman. Um and then in the third book, we get to see kind of the evolution of the family. It took all the way to like a 25-year period, and their children coming through, and how you kind of see them make the same mistakes as their parents and family that they never wanted to, which then impacts on the wider family. There's a whole shoot off scene in a building which goes on for about 3 or 4 chapters, which just blew my mind. Um, can't really explain. It was just really kind of cool, action packed. But I think that for me, as a character study over 3 or 4 or 5 characters, just I think he absolutely nails it. I like the fact it's got a bit of a sort of Asian culture to it as well. So it's less sort of it's not definitely an Italian vibe. It's more like your kind of well, yeah, an Asian sort of Tokyo. The what it's called uh,
Japanese, they
called
called
the
it, Tom.
Japanese. No, the
People from Japan,
no,
they're
the
called Japanese.
You know what I'm thinking. You know what I'm talking about.
Hammer.
They're like the Yokozuna. Yokozuna?
Yakuza.
No,
Yakuza.
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 Yeah.
Yokozuna is the fat wrestler.
Yakuza.
Um, it's the cultural vibe very interesting. Um, and yeah, I think it's just the characters are kind of everything in this series, and I think the low fantasy element gives you that if you want that. So if you want that sort of extra kind of level to it, and you've got these like minor characters along the way who are kind of actually causing huge impact. So in the first book, the head of the family is actually murdered randomly by this sort of no hope guy, who then pops up all along the way in the background and kind of
Mm.
influencing stuff without fully realizing what is influencing. And there's no hope for this guy, but he never comes into contact with most of the main characters. However, he's kind of impacting the story along the way. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you got anything you'd want to add, Alex, that you've read it, but I just
Yeah,
thought it was fantastic, really.
I agree with a
So,
lot of what you said. I think definitely agree that it could just stand alone as a crime thriller. In fact, I'd probably put crime thriller before fantasy. There's Jade is the fantasy bit, and it kind of gives people powers and makes them faster and stronger. But it's not. It's still not high fantasy. It's not like they're throwing magic around. They're just faster and stronger and better at everything than other people and martial arts and stuff. Agreed. There's a big Yakuza influence, and obviously, the world building is fantastic. It's very in depth. What they talk about, the family, the city. Jangoon, is it? John
yeah,
Loon, I think it is. It's like this, and it weirdly, I was reading it about a year ago because I was in Korea, and it's the first time really that I'd gone to any Asian city, and I was reading this book, and it's the first time I've really read, even though it's fantasy, it's a book set in more that kind of influenced world rather than like a European setting for fantasy. So that was quite cool, just because the way people think and people do things, and especially the elders in the first generation, because it's kind of there's this many nation war, which is supposed to be World War II, and it's supposed to be then about 15-20 years after that. So they're having their own kind of the people who are young then are having a kind of, they're breaking away from traditions, they're kind of being westernized a little bit, and the elder generation obviously hate that, and the elder generation are very racist and very distrustful of strangers, and then there's the kind of America analog that comes into it, and a guy gets sent there, and it's all just very, very interesting just from a cultural perspective. It's very fun. Again, like the fact that they can do these Jade warriors, and they're just basically badasses. So it's just loads of nice fight scenes. Unfortunately, the note I took is a bad joke, so I'm just trying to remember the things I thought about it now.
take the bad joke, that's fine.
I was going to say, now you've had some time to look back on it, Tom, do you look back on it fondly?
Think your jokes are making me feel a little bit jaded, to be fair. See,
I'm
it would have been
gleaned.
funny if you hadn't messaged me like 4 times with that Fondly joke in the last year, because it's I don't know how many times you've sent that to me. So
I think in a situation where the author was at it in on Twitter as well.
yes, you did. I reviewed this author on good on I think Twitter, and she replied to me, and then Alex commented saying that, so like, I hope you look at this fondly, and I'm like, the literal author has commented on it, and now the author, who I genuinely think I love, because she's an amazing author, will think I am Captain Baleine.
and I also really like her as well. So I hope she took that in
Yeah, I
the
know.
good spirit it was intended. Because she's
I
great.
think one thing I'd probably say, just one of the things I was thinking about is just to kind of take the idea of generations further, is that I the way she kind of has I can't remember the exact part, but there's a part where one of the main characters dies, and there's like one line just mentioning that like the son or daughter kind of is there in the background, really nothing, and how she then enhances that like 600 pages later when that in the Jade Legacy, because she brings all these characters like 20 years into the future, is really, really good. And it makes you feel, you mentioned that earlier, Liam, like, God, when you read a trilogy in the third one, you don't feel like you've got the outcome and the investment of that,
Yeah.
which is like the exact opposite. Like she really rewards you for sticking with it, and actually probably takes it another step further, because she doesn't just give you like, you can read a book and you cover the year span and you think, oh God, what happened next? She takes it quite a long way. You can really feel a bit of closure for all those characters, and you almost feel like, right, I'm leaving this as it goes to the next generation, and actually, I'm probably okay with that.
That was another thing that you said earlier, and I picked up on. There's a sort of sad inevitability to the cycle of aging, in that those characters, when they're young, they're like, I can't believe my dad or my granddad thinks like this, does that, makes those decisions. I'll never be like that. And then it shows you 25 years later, all the things that happened to them have basically led to them making the same decisions that they disapproved of, just because that's what happens to people. And it's just that's just a sad inevitability of getting older and your experience changing you. And the other thing, just quickly on for me, I want to say Lan died way too early. He was my favorite character.
Yes, Land died. Yeah, it's the end of the first one. Yeah, and that links into like the undertones of the drug usage that goes on throughout the 3 books, and how that impacts, like Alex says, the inevitability of people, yeah, going down certain routes. But yeah, Land died too. Hilo is one of the best character arcs I can think of, really, because he's an absolute twat, and then becomes
He's still a
in
twat
a
though,
way
isn't he? He's
he is,
still a
but
twat by the end of it.
he is a bit of a lad as well, and he sort of leads it. So yeah, again, character driven, the lowest fantasy of all the books I've probably got. But yeah, love it. Really good series.
I'd say nowhere near, but it's probably my top sort of 20, yeah, something like that. So
Nice.
yeah, good series.
Mm.
I believe it's me, and I said the wrong book earlier, so I demoted something, and so I think I demoted Rothfuss. That was supposed to be 4. So what was supposed to be my 5, but will now be my 4, is
You always make these things complicated. You
I
never,
know, I
it's never
know.
smooth. It's always something.
Well, it's like my rating system of plus 1.2 stars or minus
Right.
3 stars. It's a good system. Liam, we'll talk about that. That's something we need to get you up on the rating system.
We're not talking about it in this call because it will take over the whole thing.
It's The Final Empire, The Mistborn Saga by Brandon Sanderson.
I've heard about this book. This is a fantasy book that I've heard of. That's very exciting.
It's very famous. Brandon Sanderson, the same author that Tom, I think, brought up. You've already had a Brandon Sanderson series?
I had the first Stormlight book at 8th. Yeah.
I've to choose book 1, I went with Mistborn because I think it's sort of it's well this trilogy's finished. I know he's still pissing around in the world, but and I know all the worlds are linked. Whatever. Losing patience to the Cosmere. It's. I hope it doesn't. I think we said this in the part 1. I hope it doesn't fall in on itself, but who knows? The Mistborn Saga, just good, old-fashioned, good storytelling, great world building. There's this world that's like covered in ash because of things he's thought about, like the. You don't find out for another couple of books, and it gets a bit more complicated. And it's one of the reasons I've chosen the first one is because it doesn't bring that in. But there's not lots of complications with Brandon Sanderson, and he can usually be relied upon to back them up with good sense. But what that makes is this great, very vivid world covered in ash, where you instead of snowfall, ash falls, but it kind of gives you the same kind of impression. In the night, these mists come in and but have something to do with these people called allomancers who have there's a very, again, detailed and fun world building sort of structure within it, where again they just basically become badasses. They can manipulate metal, a bit like think Magneto from X-Men, that kind of stuff, but with slightly different flavors depending on what the metal they ingest gives them different powers. But so it introduces one of those things at a time, and if you've got one of those things or 2 of them, you're like a badass. But then there's some people who can do the whole shebang, and they're like gods basically. And there's this guy called Kelsier who comes along, and again there's a downtrodden class. Revolution happens. He persuades everyone to rise up. Everyone's sort of ruled by this sort of ruling houses, and he wants to. And above them, there's this person called I think they're literally called
the Lord Ruler, isn't he?
Lord Ruler. It's very just nameless, or not nameless, faceless sort of evil kind of thing, but he's really evil and whatever.
You don't see anything from that space in the first book, do you? It's just there.
Yeah, you just know that he's super evil and rules over everywhere with the iron fist, because he's like the ultimate in whatever the magic system is. So he's just invincible and he's ageless and all this stuff. So Kelsier comes along and puts this kind of band together, and you kind of have almost like a heist scenario where they go in, and then you take there's a girl off the streets called Vin, who they it becomes your kind of star girl who, orphan off the street, had to be told all this stuff, but she's also a full allomancer of all the metals, so she's really important. And they train her to sort of manipulate the houses into this big war, which they can use to try and attack the Lord Ruler. Won't tell you how that goes because it's a genuinely good book, and I suggest if you were going to dabble in fantasy, it's a good one to start with, because it's not like a tome of 1,000,000 words like his other series. They're still probably quite big, but Tom?
It's quite kind of. I think one thing I'd say is that I struggle with fantasy books where the magic system's quite complex because it takes me out of it a little bit. And actually, this one's one of those books where there is quite a lot in the magic space with how it's really kind of easy to follow. And in the end, in this one anyway, you can kind of picture the coins they're throwing and they're bouncing off and all that sort of stuff.
It's a very cinematic magic system. I think you can
Yeah.
very vividly you don't have to imagine, it describes like being able to sort of float, because they kind of do a Spider-Man thing where he doesn't fly, but he can use his powers to essentially mimic flying, and they do the same with by sort of repulsing metal. So anything made of metal, they can essentially fly around because
Makes
they make
sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just really sort of really intricate ways to kill people as well, because Kelsey is kind of a morally ambiguous sort of to beat the really bad people, the greater good type of thing. We're not going to cry too much over who we kill, but to the point where he's quite morally ambiguous, bit of an anti-hero. And it's just really fun and entertaining, and is a trilogy. It does get more complicated than that, but that is essentially the first book in a nutshell. Goes from there, and I would say that the series pays off really rather well and dovetails quite nicely into the rest of his Cosmere series. And I think that was when everything was rosy and hopeful and looked good with the world in Cosmere about 10 years ago.
It's definitely really obvious that it's his first book, that there's an editor over his shoulder in these books, kind of
Yes.
telling him, yeah. Whereas that editor has now been shot.
Yeah, for suggesting things like keep to 3 acts and 400 words.
Yeah.
Not 400 words, 400 pages.
Don't
400
talk about a watch for 9 hours. For fuck's sake.
Yeah, just what's in this for the reader has actually been considered. So yeah, that's my number. Was originally supposed to be 5, but I won't dwell on that any more than I already have. Liam, over to your 3.
Thank you. So
that's what I do when I'm not confident about what number it is.
yeah, my number 3, home stretch now. This is my number 3. This is House of Suns by Alistair Reynolds.
I've met him.
Have you actually?
Yeah, I've actually met him. He came into my work because we were doing a science fiction in science day to try and inspire us to have great ideas.
And look where you've ended up.
I just went because I liked books.
Yeah, he's he former scientist turned
Yes.
science fiction author. I think he used to work on the Large Hadron Collider. If I'm not imagining that.
I think so. It's been a few years since that, but that does ring a bell because he was a scientist, so there was more links there. I think he still knew people at our place.
Yeah, he's this book breaks the trend of my top 10 in that it's reasonably hopeful. I wouldn't associate it with the word bleak whatsoever. And in my opinion, it's the best. Tom talked about space opera earlier. It's the best space opera I've ever read. And seeing as I know everything, it's probably the best ever written. So what I love about House of Suns is it takes a concept of going into the future, which is fairly standard with space opera and particularly with sci-fi and space opera in particular, and it just goes millions and millions and millions of years into the future. So we just get an extrapolation of what civilization could look like if we get to that level, if we keep on developing and developing and developing. And it also contains one of my favorite things and something I think is really underserved, which is space aristocracy, basically, because I think it's a really underexplored idea in sci-fi, because there's always going to be power structures in a civilization, and if that civilization grows to millions and millions of years old, imagine how entrenched and how powerful the aristocracy will be. Reynolds basically plays with this idea to the nth degree in House of Suns. So the plot is all about this young aristocrat who is so wealthy and powerful that she goes through this process called shattering, which is essentially she clones herself into I think it's 1,000 copies or something like that. It's a very large number, but she creates 1,000 different versions of herself. Some are her gender, she's a woman, some are female, some are male. They all have like different personalities, but they're fundamentally different pieces of the same person. And they're called shatterlings, and they basically their life's mission then becomes that they all split up, travel across the galaxy, and get together every 200,000 years to collate all the knowledge, all the insight, all the and everything they've found on their travels into this kind of like grand library of galactic life. And that's their purpose, that's their mission. And there's like a handful of so there's a handful of these houses, the titular House of Suns, that have reached this level of power that do this, and they essentially dominate and influence life throughout the galaxy. So yeah, I think like in terms of high or big ideas, should I say, that is right up there in terms of comparing where we're at now as human beings to that degree of control over the galaxy, and that just the expansive nature of that idea. I absolutely loved that and bought into it straight away. So world building's amazing. Really hard sci-fi, which obviously you'd imagine coming from.
I was just going to ask that. It is
Yeah, I was
really
gonna
hard sci-fi.
Yeah, it's quite famous within sci-fi for having like a relativistic car chase, right? So
Right.
the protagonists are being pursued at near light speed, and they're being pursued again by assailants at just slightly above that near light speed. And so Reynolds somehow manages to make the effects of relativity not just like interesting, but exciting and pivotal to the outcome of the chase.
But presumably, everyone else in the story then has died by the time this chase finishes.
Exactly, like it's that degree of like
Like,
it,
cool.
it can be quite mind bending. It's also got a really deeply satisfying ending, and an ending that you think it's building towards like a typical conclusion that where there's going to be a big confrontation, and I don't want to say it subverts your expectations, because that's probably got a Game of Thrones connotation that is now a bad thing, but it just presents the kind of ending that you thought was going to happen, but in a completely different. It's a different kind of confrontation. It's not trying to be a Hollywood kind of way to close out the story. Instead, it seems to me, as much as you could think of such a far future scenario as realistic, it plays out in a much more realistic way. So yeah, this is the first Reynolds book I ever read, and I read it. I can still picture exactly where I was when I read it, and it's I don't know, probably 500-600 pages. I read it in like 3 days in summer, and I just remember it being pretty much flawless. And every Reynolds I've read since then, unfortunately, has been a step down. Still great, but just nothing has ever touched that high, which I think speaks to just how, in my opinion, it is a pretty much a perfect book. So yeah, that's House of Suns. Absolutely love it.
Is that a
Is it part of a
series or?
series? Oh, sorry,
The-
House of
same
Suns
question. Yeah.
is not a series. No, House of Suns is a standalone,
Okay.
which I think might be part of the reason why it's so good. Reynolds has said he'd like to revisit the world of House of Suns again, but he's probably most well known for Revelation Space, which is a 4 main book series. Then there's multiple spin-offs and lots of short stories. I found Revelation Space to be bloated. So this as a standalone, I think, is like just a perfect distillation of an idea. Don't get me wrong, I'd love House of Suns too, but I'd hate for it to somehow dilute the perfection of the standalone.
Fair enough.
That's
Fair enough. Can you imagine how good the piss up would be if you'd only seen each other over 200,000 years?
oh god, especially with all that new information as well.
That's a millennium-long hangover. It'd be horrible. Should we break for because of the timing, and I need a wee, and
I also
come
need a
back?
wee.
I'll see you in a minute. Bye
Yeah.
bye.
But
Bye-bye.
Bye.